Hi, and welcome to Dear Art Producer. I am your host, Heather Elder, and today is April 26th, 2023, and we are joined by Kim Stoerker, a freelance integrated art producer. Kim began her career in the Green Mountains of Vermont, managing productions for brands including Burton Snowboards, Microsoft, and Nike. And in 2012, she moved to New York City, where she has worked for various ad agencies and led productions on large-scale campaigns for brands such as American Express, Intel, Verizon, United Airlines, Marriott, and Lincoln, among them. Today, she applies her more than 20 years of experience as she continues to evolve in her role as a freelance producer. Welcome, Kim. Hello.
Hi, Heather. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy. I've seen you. I've talked to you so many times in the last few months. It's just been so fabulous to reconnect. Thank you for being on the show.
Yes, thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. I always like to start off by kind of recognizing that not all art producers take the same path to their job. So I'm kind of curious where you started and, how did you end up doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about that. So backing up many years, I attended college at the University of Vermont and I minored in art. And so we often had guest speakers in the classroom. And one of those speakers was from a small graphic design firm. He was a production director for the firm. So he came to our class to speak about what he did day to day for his primary client, Burton Snowboards, and how his team sourced and contracted artists to create work that would later be incorporated into the design of a snowboard. And so that blew my mind. And it got my attention because, I as an art minor, I just wasn't really aware of the career opportunities out there for people who might not go into the world and become a fine artist. Mm-hmm. So just listening to him talk was really just inspiring and exciting to me. And I really, learned as much as I could about the company he worked for and had the opportunity to get an internship working for the art producer at that company my senior year of college, and then was lucky enough to continue on with them full time after I graduated. So
such a great way to get your feet wet and, recognize all the coolness that was advertising back then, I think.
For sure. And it's a whole different world to me. I just, the commercial space and understanding that there was that position of somebody who could actually be researching artists, didn't have to be the creator of the art, but research it and be the person to help actually get those projects in motion and see them through. I just wasn't familiar with art for commercial purposes until that moment.
And that's what you're doing now. How do you see your role now similar and different from what you experienced back then?
Yeah. So I think that it was an interesting starting point because it was a very creative shop and a smaller graphic design studio. They had 3 offices. One was in Vermont, one was in Portland, Oregon, and one was in Soho here in the city. So I had an opportunity to come to New York, and I really, that was my first introduction to living in New York City before I was actually here. But so the job was a little bit different just because as a smaller agency that wasn't a traditional advertising agency, we wore many hats and everybody did a little of everything, and process was very fast and loose, and there was a lot of run and gun on production. So it was a pretty interesting way to learn about production. And I certainly don't think that while it was an amazing education about lots of things, I still had a lot to learn even after I had, the years of experience working with this particular company. And fast forward to my time in New York City, I've had the opportunity to work at these much larger, more traditional ad agencies for a long period of time and really kind of combine all the skills from both that first job and then all the experiences from these larger ad agencies that just do things in a very, very different way. And in lots of cases, I just was so grateful to have some of the process that came from those larger agencies and the support that came with, just the different roles that existed at these larger agencies.
Well, and all the teams that you've worked on have been so stellar, at least from when I've known you. So I'm sure you have learned a lot and have taught a lot for sure.
Yes, both sides. I love the educational part of our job, but certainly, I mean, I feel like you can never stop learning, and doesn't matter how long you're with a company. I've been lucky to find a great home at some of the places where I've worked and been there for longer periods of time. And definitely, over the years, you just keep learning. There's something to take from every project.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So what are you known for from like, what do you on your teams, on the different teams that you work for? Like what kind of rises to the top?
Yeah. I mean, I think that generally speaking, I feel like a producer is everyone's partner and resource during the life of a production. I kind of approach it, I like to approach it that way. Just meaning, you think about the account manager and the creative team and the client and the production partners. And, the producer's there to assure a project stays on track and delivers the highest quality result. And I just, I feel like that person is kind of there for everyone to ask questions and to poke holes in the plan and to bounce ideas off of. And so I kind of see that person, I see that role rather as really a partner and a resource to all parties on a team. I've also heard the producer referred to as a cat herder, which I feel like feels accurate.
Oh my God, that feels like my job too.
I'm sure I'm not the first to say that.
That's funny. So what do you think reps and photographers could better understand about what you do?
I thought about this question a little bit when it was, when I saw some of the questions that came through. And I feel like one thing, because I feel like there's such an open dialogue right now between agents and agency producers, and even with photographers and agency producers. And so I don't feel like there's a lot that's really a mystery these days. If those people have been in the business for long enough, I feel like they've probably heard a lot of the challenges that come up, and none of it seems like there wouldn't be too much that was a surprise. But one thing that came to mind that I just feel like is oftentimes a challenge along the way is when a project comes in with a scope and a budget already in place. Meaning someone will say to you, who's kicking off the project, this is what you have budget-wise, and this is what you need to deliver. And that's something that, I feel like when you're kicking off a project and reaching out to creative partners and agents the first time, you don't want to share all of that stuff and all of the, nuances of how the project came in. But sometimes, it's not always something a producer has control over. I do feel like there's, ideally a producer is brought in early enough in the process so that they can really guide the creative by offering ideas or suggestions that might alter the way a concept is generated and sold through. But I think, I think that that's something that there are times, just to say, if this is the opportunity to kind of get that word out. There are those moments where it's just dictated. And I think the one bright spot about that is that it's an opportunity to educate everybody. If you are just being handed a budget and a scope, then it's like, all right, let's talk about what this means and what we can get for this and how we can make it the best it can be, despite, potentially these budget and scope restrictions. So, and then how to do it differently next time, potentially.
Yeah. That's a great point. Like I always look at a budget as like, how can I maximize it and give you the most amount of value out of that budget? So even if it's not an ideal budget, I might say to you, the art producer, okay, how about I give you two estimates? I give you what I think it should cost and then what I can give you for that amount of money. If that isn't an accurate, enough money that, you might be able to find someone who can produce it for that. But if I can't, I always want to, maximize what I can give you. Because I think that's what a lot of times, not only are the clients choosing, the agencies choosing their who they're going to award the job to based on the creative and who they want to work with, but who's going to maximize the most amount of value for them and provide the most amount of content.
For sure. And I think that's a great approach and a very helpful approach. I mean, it's not something that you as an agent have to do, but if you are willing to do it, I feel like that's such a helpful tool for us internally at an agency to take back to our team and say, hey, like, let's talk because I just got these two estimates and I just want to walk you through what they look like. And so you have some perspective on where the numbers maybe should be and what might feel more realistic the next time around. Like they're willing to do it for X amount of money, but just having that perspective and like something concrete to reference back to, even if it's something that's like an internal tool and doesn't make it in front of the client, it might not be appropriate on every project, but I think that's great.
You understand my thought process, right? Like, if I can't come in at your budget, why can't I? Well, here's why. Here's what you get. If I had another $30,000, here's what else I could give you.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I love that approach.
Let's talk a little bit about the projects that you work on, just kind of generally. Do you find right now that more of the projects or more of the scopes that are coming your way tend to be photography or motion or both?
That's a great question. And I feel like I don't have an exact breakdown. Like I feel like everything is so fluid, and I guess that's going to be part of my answer. I feel like motion is always a consideration these days. So if a project doesn't initially have motion in the scope, it often crops up as a possibility during pre-production. That happened on a shoot that I worked on this past December, where it wasn't part of the initial scope. And then we got halfway through pre-production. And then it was like, oh, we need a third day and motion. And, it changed the budget and the team that we needed. So I think for me, my lesson for myself was always good to ask that motion question as early as possible, so you have the right team and resources in place if there's a pivot, because I feel like I've seen it happen often where even if they don't say it up front, somebody will say something along the way and it'll come back.
I agree. It always does. Mm-hmm. So are you working on any other types of projects besides photography and motion? Is there anything else, types of work that comes across your desk?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind just because it was sort of new to me in the last year that I thought I would mention. I had the opportunity. I've been working on in the automotive category for the better part of 2 years, and just recently moved on from that. But while I was working on that type of work, that category, I had the opportunity to work on some automotive projects this past year where we were placing the 3D CAD files of the vehicle into a virtual environment. And this is likely familiar to lots of people who might be listening, but it was my first time working with HDR dome imagery. So learning about that process and working to see, how realistic it could get, it was pretty interesting. And, CGI is one thing and definitely, a unique process, but working with a 3D virtual environment and creating assets in that way with that type of stock content was a little bit of a different process. So I was grateful to work on it. Definitely so many questions along the way, but it was super cool to see it come to life because it looked really good. It's come a long way,
That's great. Yeah, really fascinating how much technology is changing our business. I feel like that's a whole nother podcast, but really, I feel like every day something new is coming towards me that I'm trying to learn and understand. It's great you had the opportunity to work on that.
For sure.
Let's talk a little bit about marketing to you. And I know you're freelance, so, I think answering it as a freelancer and as someone on staff, both answers would be really helpful, I think. How do people connect with you right now? Reps, photographers, directors? And is there something more effective or, is there a more effective or useful message that kind of rises to the top for you?
For sure. So I feel like, it's also interesting. I feel like there are even more than just two answers, being a full-time and being freelance, just because, we're in this transition period of a hybrid work environment. So there's just so many possibilities of how you can have meetings with people. But like you said, I'm newly freelance. So I've been personally excited to reconnect with lots of agents. So it's fairly easy to connect with me right now, because I'm probably looking to connect with you as well, which has just been a really nice time to reconnect with so many people. But I think for me, as far as, speaking as a freelancer, an old-fashioned email is still working for me. I really do my best to look at everything that I get. I actually appreciate, I've had some reps reach out and say, hey, I sent you this last week. I just wanted to follow up. And did you get a chance to look at it? And I appreciate the nudge if I haven't responded or haven't had a chance to look at it. but I feel like I do look at things and I do file things away. And just because, I'm not in the office right now and we're not getting really much snail mail and there's not always an opportunity to look at an actual, book in person. I do feel like, getting an email, getting updates about the work that the photographers are doing, that's the next best thing for me as a freelancer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, email is probably the most direct way. I feel like I've always said this about email. It's interruption marketing, right? Like I am interrupting the person that I'm emailing. And that is a bit of a struggle. I have to catch them at the right time, or I have to hope that they're, not so busy that they're just going to delete it. So I'm kind of curious, as those emails kind of fill your inbox, do you feel like, there's something that is there's some emails that are more effective than others, or is it just you're interested in seeing a wide variety of like new work and, solutions and things like that? Like what is most interesting to you?
I do think, and I know it means more work for the sender, but I do think note that makes me feel like there's a person behind the email versus just the form letters. That kind of helps, especially if I know the person. It's like I've got so many. I love to reconnect and I love to hear from people, but I'm probably more apt to send a personal response.
Yeah,
if I'm getting a note from someone that's like, "Hey Kim, how are?" And I know that that's not always the most effective use of everyone's time. So I understand that it's just not possible to do it that way all the time. I'll always look at them regardless. But I think I'll respond directly to that person if there's maybe a personal note attached.
That's really good to hear because we send multiple types of emails, right? We'll send our email blast, which is a bit designed and, we'll go out to our 5,000 name list or however many names on the list, right? That will just generally go out. But then we spend time like really curating a finer, smaller list of people. Maybe we'll see a cool article out there that we'll reference, or we'll know that somebody works on an account that is relevant. And then we will send a personal email, and we've tried to figure out how to bulk do those emails so that we can kind of scale and be a bit more, get more of them out, but then they're not personal. And I find that the personal emails, sometimes get a lot more response. So it's really for the people who are listening out there, it is very much worth the effort, and it is more effort for sure. But to kind of be that, try and be that specific in in what you're writing to someone.
Yeah, yeah. And then I guess just to answer that question as a full timer, I know that we were going into the office 3 days a week, and Monday and Friday we'd work from home. So in the 3 days that we were in the office, we would take meetings. They were fewer and further between, just because I feel like when I was in the office full time, it was still heavily transitioning back from really being out of the office, working fully remote. So it's been slow to bounce back, but I do think if people are full time right now, my hunch is that there is going to be a return of these in-person meetings with teams. And of course, that's always like the best case, is either to meet people in a social environment or go into an agency and have in-person meetings. Cause I feel like having that in-person interaction is so valuable. You just get to know a person and
No,
so much better that way.
My entire career, I've been in San Francisco. And every year I go out on the road and go to, different parts of the country and have appointments. And I'm there somewhere a week or two. And it's always been really positive because I've been able to, people have been in the office traditionally. So you go to a city and you can cover that city in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. Obviously, since COVID, everything has changed. And I've been spending a lot more time in New York. And in the fall, I was there for 2 months. And in this spring, I was there for almost 3 months. And I'm seeing a huge difference in just the accessibility of being able to be out there and see people in person, because it's not just a portfolio show anymore. I'm taking people out for coffee or meeting them for lunch, or, just kind of more like connecting with them than I am, presenting work, because there's not a lot of people to present work to anymore.
For sure. Well, and also because I feel like when we weren't really having those meetings in the office, just because maybe there was risk involved with an agent coming into an agency, and there were all these COVID procedures that would limit how many non-employees could enter a building. I think you're right. That's been my experience as well, that like I really have had social outings with people in the industry so much more in the past couple of years, just because access has been an issue. So hopefully we'll see that change again. Now that things are loosening up.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's talk about like the actual, you've got a scope and now it's time to find somebody for a project. How do you go, like, how do you even start? How do you go about finding someone to share with your creative team?
I don't have one answer to that. I feel like I have got an archive of photo agents and bookmarks and promo emails that are filed, and Instagram photographers who I follow, who I love, and I keep in my back pocket. And like someday, maybe there'll be a project that feels right for this person. And of course, I feel like we've got a small group of producers who are always on text if there's really somebody who gets hung up and has a question and needs a name.
Yeah.
So phoning a friend is always an option.
That's always good.
But yeah, so I mean, I feel like there are just so many great websites out there these days. I feel like if you're looking for someone who is location specific, which I just was recently for my first freelance job, I, of course, always go to Wonderful Machine because they, are very location forward. They'll share exactly where everyone's located. Diversify Photo is kind of set up the same way, and they have tons of great talent. So just so many options out there, I feel like, for just modes of finding new talent.
Are you finding that there are any trends in terms of photography that your teams are excited about right now?
So I feel like the one thing that I've been kind of digging into, and again, this is very specific to my focus over the last few years, but recently I've been loving this more cinematic and moody style of shooting automotive. And I think that's specific to the brand that I was working on. And I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing photographers, Kurt Iswarienko and Oscar Backy and Tomek Olzowski. They all shoot in this style beautifully. And, there's always the kind of more traditional automobile, like buzzing around the dry lake bed and having a huge plume of dust kick up behind them. And that's dynamic too. So there's definitely a time and a place for that. But I kind of like the challenge of storytelling when the tone is like a little bit more subdued, which it has been for the brand that I've been working on.
And what's your process for sharing options with your team once you've got a list of people for them to consider?
Yeah, I think it will be a little bit different depending on who the team is. So if it's a team that I've never worked with before and I'm still kind of getting to know their style and, who they may have worked with before, who they've gravitated towards, because I feel like everyone has their list of absolutely not, or yes, absolutely, I would love to work with that person. And so usually if I haven't worked with a team, I might start with 15 links, which may seem like a lot, but I feel like without having that history and knowing knowing their short lists, I like to start broad, and maybe I'll send another more curated, more focused list as like a second round.
You decide if you're going to send the photographer's link or the rep's link. Is there a difference for you, or do you care?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I feel like I do think about that. I think it just depends on which feels more in line with the creative direction.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I send both just because, I certainly want the creative team to see the full breadth and like everything that this photographer is capable of. And, if I feel like it's a good fit and you're trying to say, hey, can this person be on your short list? And you want every possible chance to get them on that short list, then, sharing more work may really help the photographer. So, but then it's also, I definitely have seen sites where one is better than the other. And to your point, I might only share one depending on what feels most in line with the project that we're working on.
And what do you think, and maybe there's not an answer to this, there might, you might not have an idea, but what would you like to tell our listeners about this part of the process that they might not understand? And before you answer that, I'm going to add to that, in the old days, you would call me and say, "Oh, I want to see so-and-so's book." And I would ship you a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And I would know that you were interested in this particular photographer, right? So this part of the consideration process I had access to, and I knew what was happening. Right now, I rarely have an idea if you're looking at any of my photographers or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally someone will say, "Hey, here's the layout. Who do you have?" And I'll send them a bunch of links. But if they don't do that and they know on their own and they just grab the links on their own, I'm not privy to that. So yeah. So what else would you add to that maybe people aren't really kind of understanding about the process?
Yeah, and this all I have an answer, but this probably will be something that people are already familiar with. But the selection process is definitely collaborative. So sometimes a creative comes to the table knowing exactly who they want to work with. Perhaps they actually were inspired by a photographer's work, and that kind of directed or guided the direction of the concept in some way. And so it becomes, more important that that person makes it into the short list and perhaps a triple bid if that's the way the project is being bid out. And oftentimes a creative will have no one in mind. And so the producer is coming to the table with the only options being considered. And it's really up to you to help provide the best options and really help them make the decision about who they're going to be proceeding with. And I guess the one thing that maybe people wouldn't be familiar with, and I don't know that it happens at every agency, but we go through a pre-bid process, and the photographers are shared, or at least the top 3 photographers are shared. And usually at that point, we've already checked their interest and availability so we know that they're available for the project, but it is before we start the bidding process. So sharing the photography links and perhaps a one-sheeter of the photographer's work with the clients to say, this is the direction we're headed. And that's the opportunity that if for some reason, and it rarely has happened, but if for some reason they feel like we're off base, we can have that conversation before we really get into finessing the numbers.
Interesting. Okay, so then next, kind of in the process, right? You've chosen your talent, you've narrowed it down to most likely 3, is obviously the creative call and the treatments. Those are both very crucial in the process. And, some might say the creative call is more important. Others might say the treatment is more important. I tend to think they're equally important because they can both really, one or the other you could be amazing at one and the other could, knock you out. Or you could kind of, not do a great job on one and the other could make you, all of a sudden go from the spot number 3 to number 1. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about both of those and start with the creative call. Wondering if there's anything that consistently stands out as a reason that a creative may choose a photographer or director to bid that comes from the creative call.
So I feel like if a creative team, the work is absolutely the most important piece of it, and looking at that work and understanding, is that work really going to bring the concept to life? So I think that's always number one. But I do think if a creative team has a working history with a photographer, that may or may not sway a decision. I also feel like capabilities these days, if, certainly like we were talking about earlier on the call, if motion is a part of the scope, understanding who has that capability. And I'm guessing at the point, once we get to the creative call, we've already established that motion would be a part of it. So I assume everyone on the call who we're bidding with would be capable of shooting motion. And then I'd say perhaps just their approach to production. And I guess I just mean, how seasoned is a photographer? I always love to consider anybody, just people who have been in the business for years and years, and new photographers who are up and coming, who just might be a little bit more green and looking for a new opportunity. But I do think that there are some circumstances, if you're working with a celebrity or something, and you've got 20 minutes
Yeah.
And, you're asking those questions about how fast can they problem solve on set, and would they thrive in a high pressure situation where time is really limited. So I think some of those questions definitely are factored in. We had that scenario in a triple bid recently, and we had a great young photographer who will do great in her career, but she was part of the bidding process, and we really worked with her to make sure that her treatment, which was her first one, felt good and felt like it fit within the family of the 3 treatments, and really worked with her to kind of make sure that she had a good experience with that. She didn't end up getting the job, but I'm sure she'll be successful.
Well, what about treatments? How valued are treatments? Do creatives even read them? Do you share them with the client? I'm sure it varies, but I'd love your take on it.
Mhm. Treatments have not always been part of the photography process, and I'm sure you know that better than anyone. That there was a time when it just, it was find a couple of photographers, and you'd hop on a call and walk through the shot list and talk about the project, and that would be it. And that's how you'd make your decision, really truly based on the work and on the call that you've had. But treatments, I feel like in the last, I don't know, 5 to 7 years, have really become the norm. At least at the agencies that I've been working at, and I do feel like they are really helpful. I think that people read them, and I think they are shared with the clients, and I think they're worth the effort. I've seen a great one really shift the front runner.
What makes a treatment stand out?
I know that they're very time intensive. And so I feel like it's important to not ask for more than you need for a project. I know lots of times you could have a treatment that's 50 pages long. And for me, I feel like it's sharing your point of view, sharing beautiful imagery. And ultimately, I feel like a good treatment is concise, but complete and well organized, easy to navigate, and just work and words that are relevant to the concept.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I would add to that, being specific. I know because these treatments are so, I cannot stress it enough, time consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys are, and women who are working on them are oftentimes doing it on the weekends or at nights because they're shooting or they've got other stuff going on. They tend to have templates, right? That they use, and then they edit them and, make them relevant to whatever project they're on. So they'll change the text, they'll change the images, obviously. But I'm really pushing our team to be as specific as possible instead of the general, like, we will use natural lighting or we will hire real people talent. And here's the value of real people talent. It's like, okay, but what will you specifically do, photographer A, that is going to be different than what photographer B is going to do with real people talent? Because everyone's using real people talent on this. So it's a hard thing to pull out of someone, but it is something that we're working on because I feel like the more specific a treatment can be, you gave the example of like working with a celebrity on set. So a way to be specific there is rather than just talking about, oh, I have experience with celebrities, it's like, okay, I have experience with celebrities and I recognize I can only have 20 minutes, but I also know they're probably going to show up on set 3 hours late and, like list out all the things that you will do based on your experience to, make that, like, make you, Kim, feel like you're in good hands with someone.
Yeah, for sure. I agree entirely. And I feel like this is sort of true for both the creative call and the treatment, that I feel like a successful creative call, a successful treatment, the treatment is something that is not two ways, like a creative call, a conversation is, but lots of idea sharing, taking the time, having a photographer take the time to understand the project details before a call so they can really engage with the creative team and the whole agency team. I always love it when a photographer presents an alternate solution that maybe the creatives haven't thought of. And in many cases, might be a better approach just because they're the photographer and they've got that unique point of view. And that kind of thing can totally shift a decision. And, a creative team walks away and they're like, oh, that was it.
That was it. Yeah. I also think it's really important for photographers to recognize that just because something is common for them or easy or they do it all the time doesn't mean that the person you're on the call with thinks the same. Right? Like I was on a call a couple of weeks ago and a photographer was like, oh yeah, we do that all the time. We tag team like that. That's not a big deal for us. That's easy. Well, that's a selling point in the sense that like you have experience and that's positive for you. But I was thinking afterwards, like, oh, the people you're talking to, that might not necessarily be easy for them. Let's elaborate a little bit more on that and what that looks like and why that's so easy for you and why is your experience together helpful in this situation? So
for sure. And each team is different. So it's such a helpful thing if someone walks into a situation and has that feeling and that confidence and they're, that's what they're going to leave with the team. And that's amazing. But also like, help me understand the team dynamic at the agency, like what challenges might be unique to this project. And, again, it's back to just asking questions and really understanding kind of the unique circumstances of this project, which I feel like most photographers are, that's definitely part of the phone calls and the treatments. And they're really good at that.
We touched on this very briefly at the beginning when you were kind of talking about first getting a scope, but I'm curious, are you often given budgets by your clients?
Sometimes. I think more often than not. I usually it's sort of a little bit of, it's been a negotiation over the, most recently, meaning I might get a budget, but then say, that actually might not be realistic based on what I'm hearing from the creative team. Can we revisit the budget? Mm-hmm. And then the conversation continues and evolves. And, it's like a push and pull kind of thing with the creative team, maybe saying, okay, this is what we could lose if we had to lose something. And the account team kind of working with us and saying, oh, we actually can find some additional funding to get these other things that the creative team is wanting. So it's a very like active conversation when you're establishing the budget to kind of get to the place. And oftentimes it's fixed and there isn't that opportunity to have that kind of a negotiation, but ultimately it will be the client and the internal teams that, really decide how much and what's possible.
How about usage? Do you think most clients understand the importance of usage?
Yeah, I think that clients right now, it's a very interesting time. I feel like they want everything. That's been my experience. And, there have been moments when that's cropped up in my career where someone's looking for unlimited and perpetual, but everyone, every project that I've been working on lately has had that ask. And it kind of blows my mind because it hasn't always been that way. And it has been cost prohibitive and really potentially unnecessary given the short lifespan of some of the imagery. But I think clients like the flexibility and the value. Yeah. And I think if they want to choose to keep using the images after the life cycle has ended, then, they don't want to have to worry about tracking it or being in breach of contract after the expiration date. So, I definitely think, it's coming up more frequently and it is sort of surprising for me. I feel like I always kind of caveat. I'm like, we can't promise that. We can certainly ask the question and see what's possible, but the price tag might be significantly higher if we're asking that. So I do my best to find a balance just because I think that this is definitely a shift. I imagine it's really hard for agents and creative partners. Are you experiencing that?
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's really hard, and they use words like buyout instead of unlimited usage, unlimited time. And, it's definitely a continued education process. I do find though, who I'm educating a bit more right now than the clients are the account people. I feel like there's a lot of young, inexperienced account people being put in roles where they don't always understand yet, and they're still learning, especially with the remote work, right? Mm-hmm. And they're being asked to talk to clients about stuff, and the clients are pushing back, and maybe they're a bit afraid, and they don't, the account people don't want to really kind of stand up. So there are questions that are coming back to us about usage that just it makes it a bit challenging. And then also, if you add to that the broadcast and the kind of integration of the departments between broadcast and motion, broadcast and stills, you get a broadcast producer coming over into the still world, and there's not that respect or understanding of usage. And that has made for some really interesting conversations too.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like it's been kind of trending in this direction since social media and the need for more content, faster, cheaper content for social media, as that's all been happening. It's like, and the idea that I know certain clients feel like they need to remove a post depending on the usage, like at the end of a usage term. And I think, the rules around that sometimes are gray for clients. So I think helping them understand what they actually need to do in that case and helping them understand what they have. Because, I feel like even a 3-year or a 5-year use feels better to me than unlimited and perpetual.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you might be able to get that from a photographer, but talent are, they're either going to be a fortune or they're just not going to agree to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the last year or so, do you think it's been harder to get an estimate approved by a client right now, or no real change?
I feel like it's no real change. I feel like, I do think that if everybody is doing the work and communicating prior to an award call and are prepared and share all of the information, and ideally you've gone through that pre-bid process earlier on before you even started bidding, so the likelihood of surprises during the award call it goes down. Hopefully, yeah. So hopefully everyone's aligned as that process, as the bidding is in process, and when it comes time to award, it's just like yes, this is what we agreed to. No surprise. This is the usage, the shot list. There are our photographers again. And it's just kind of revisiting the past details. But it's production and everything changes quickly. So I think it depends. It depends on the day because a curveball can come from any side. So,
well, that is so true. Yes. Every day is different in this position, in this job. Mm-hmm. What about the award process? When it comes time to choosing a photographer or director, do you find that clients are choosing based on their own criteria, or are they deferring to their agency partners?
I think the clients usually defer to the creative for their recommendation, but I do think it depends on the client agency relationship and how much trust is there. So perhaps it might feel different if it's a new client who they've never worked with before, and the agency might be pushing the work and pushing it in an amazing direction, but it's still pushing it to a place where it might be out of the comfort zone for the client. And in those cases, the dialogue, there's more conversation and more anxiety, and I understand that. I'm empathetic to the position our clients are in that case. But so that's when it's nice when you have a relationship with a client that spans over years, and you can fall back on that. And they're like, you know what, if you think this photographer is the best, then absolutely, let's go with this. And most often, depending on that relationship, they're deferring to the creative reco.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think that there's anything you feel like clients or agencies need to be better educated about in terms of the review process, or even reps and photographers? So just in general, like where you sit, like who and what part of the process do you think is misunderstood?
And when you say review process, which part of the process do you mean? Reviewing treatments or estimates?
Okay. Yeah. So maybe, yes, reviewing talent. Let's say you've got your 3 already, and where you're going to choose somebody and you're going to award the job. So in the award process, what part of that do you feel like is a bit misunderstood?
I think the time and planning it takes just to simply get to that point, that, I think there are many moments or many different award calls where I think I've felt that from clients, and they're not that I'm looking for a pat on the back for that, but they're like, wow, this is a lot of work. Thank you for putting it together. Yeah. But just the realization that from a process standpoint, we spent a couple of hours on creative calls and hours, the agency producer with the line producer working out the logistics and already like the problem solving times 3. If it's triple bid, it is elaborate. And so you're not just showing up with a bottom line for them to review. This is really like, there's a lot of thinking and planning that goes into where you land for that award call.
Yeah. And I think too, I would add, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I just think this is based on all my experience. You're in this triple bid and you've been on a call and you've presented a treatment and the feedback is really positive, right? Oh my God, on the call, it was amazing. They really liked you. And, you got good feedback on the treatment and your numbers came right in on budget. I think a lot of times photographers I don't think they just think they're going to get the job because of that, but they're in a very positive space because of that. And I'm guessing that like you've probably had 2 other really great calls or at least one other really great call. And there's going to be things or reasons that are out of your control as a rep or photographer at that point. You've literally done it all. There's nothing else that you can do differently. Somebody else might have the exact image or they worked on the exact condition or whatever it is, and that you just would have no ability to compete with. And I think there's just so much out of our control that I think people forget sometimes.
For sure. I've got, if we've got time, I've just got a short story about that because I feel like this part of the process is, I have a lot of, I am excited about this part of the process and I feel like I take it, it's one thing that I'll give you a backwards answer. There's one thing that I really don't like about the job, and that it's when you bid with 3 photographers, like you're explaining, one gets the job. So I love sharing the good news with that winning photographer, but I do always carve out time to make those other 2 phone calls because each of the 3 teams bidding put in so much time and effort. We talked about the treatment and how much goes into that because so much does go into that, and the creative calls. So I just feel like you have to take the time to recognize that. And it's not easy to lose. It's inevitable in business, but it's still not easy. So I feel like my goal at this step of the process is to have all 3 bidders walk away having had a positive experience. So even if they didn't get the job this time, I feel like it's important that they walk away at least having a little bit of context for why the job went this way. And sharing that story, there was a project where we knew what photographer we were going to work with. He was by far and away the only photographer that was going to be right for this project. But we had to do a triple bid. So we looked for other photographers that would feel like they were a good second and third option. And we did okay. We found a couple of photographers and, we felt like they were great options, but they just weren't gonna beat that number one guy. And so then we had the creative calls and the treatments came in, and the creative call and treatment from this one photographer was so good. I think the response I got from my creative once he read the treatment was just one line. It was, wow.
Wow.
And so we hopped on the call.
Yeah.
And I said, I fully agree with you. I read this. I'm so excited. And I was having a moment of excitement for the underdog.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I know we've got our top guy here, but I think we have to give the second photographer a look. So we all had this crazy internal discussion about who to even recommend to the client in that case. And we ended up, we shared all of the treatments and shared how much passion we had for the number 2 in this case. And it was a long conversation with the client. And in the end, we did go with the number 1 guy. But that was part of my call back to the second photographer who didn't get the job. All of this context about the treatment and what kind of response he got to his treatment. And the fact that it took us so far, it knocked our socks off. And we were convinced that we had the one guy who could do this job, but he stopped us and made us rethink everything. And so I think that kind of feedback is so critical to share with photographers. And, hopefully he didn't feel like it was a total loss. I don't think it was, But he did such a great job. You just have to let people know when that kind of a moment happens.
Well, I have to say thank you on behalf of all of us out there for not only your attention to that part of the process, your respect for it, and for sharing that story, because it is so much work now to do the estimates and the treatments and the creative calls. And a lot of photographers say that, by the time I'm done with the process, I've already produced the job in my mind. So if I don't get the job, it's not just that we did a bid and we've moved on. Like, I've produced this in my head. I've got the vision for it, and it's a big disappointment to lose. Mm-hmm. And there's so many people, never mind the people who don't get back to me, right? And the ones that I have to chase down. But there's so many people who I get this email that's, thank you very much for your time. We appreciated your effort. We've gone in another direction. That might as well have been not even letting me know. Like, that gives me absolutely nothing. And that was fine when all I did was give you a bid 15 years ago. But the amount of time that we're putting in, I really want to learn from that process. And while it's not up to you to teach me anything, I do say, just give me one more sentence. One more sentence. Let me know. Say something of value that I can give back for this entire team that worked on this, instead of, sorry, you didn't get the job. Like,
yeah,
why? And or who got it and why? And maybe you can't share who. I understand that, but like, can you please offer some context to the meeting that you had? Like, think about the amount of time I put in the treatment. That might have taken me 4 hours to do, or 5 hours of collective time. If you just gave me like 5 minutes of your time in an email, even if it's not a phone call, like, that would go so far in the morale of our industry, I think.
For sure. Well, and I mean, I agree with everything you just said. And I do feel like it's changed as there has become more steps for the photographer, more hoops for everyone to jump through in an effort to get these jobs, and knowing that oftentimes it is a double or triple bid. And there is a likelihood that you're not going to get the job because there are other people in the same pool as you. But I do feel like it's such a critical moment to recognize that. And, just to all of this to say to photographers and agents out there that, it matters on our side of things, like the work that we receive from you. And it's a helpful tool for us. So if it's put together and it's put together well, it makes our job so much easier. So that I feel like you have to also take the time to share that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Kim. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. One last question before we wrap up with my 2 little personal questions I always ask. What is your prediction for the rest of 2023? How do you feel about it? It's such a weird time out there.
Well, I feel like AI is on my mind just because things are happening so quickly with it. I don't have any experience working with it, so I don't have much to really say about my personal experience with it at the workplace. But I just, I think when you and I talked last time, we talked about the AMA recently doing that webinar on AI and the role in the creative industry. And there was so much dialogue on that phone call, and so many good questions, and a lot that were just, there weren't necessarily good answers to at this point, but it's happening so fast. And, I think that lots of people in an agency setting aren't really even allowed to use AI quite yet, just because, lawyers can't really tell where the imagery is coming from, and it still has risk attached to it. But I'm just interested to see how that impacts our industry, because I feel like soon we're really going to feel it. I'm just not sure exactly in what form it will take.
Yeah, I agree. And not just in image creation, right? There's just so many other ways to utilize AI in advertising. So it'll be interesting to see. Okay, so then I always ask everyone these same 2 questions. I feel like I want to evolve them, but at this point, I'm almost at 100 episodes, and I want to keep them going at least until then.
Congratulations.
I know. Thank you.
Accomplishment.
What is your favorite thing to do on a Sunday? And if you weren't a producer, what would you be?
I would say we have a little garden that my partner Brandon and I have put together, a little herb garden. So I would probably noodle around in the garden, or take a hike with my dog, or maybe post up at my boyfriend's sake brewery for happy hour. It seems like a good day to me. And it's often how my Sundays go. So it's a very honest answer.
Okay. And if you didn't do this, what would you do if you couldn't be a producer?
It's funny. When I was younger, I grew up thinking, I'm going to be a lobbyist in Washington.
Oh my gosh.
But that seemed way too stressful. So I went for the super relaxing job of producer in the ad industry. So I'm not sure I don't know if I got the short straw. But I feel like my fantasy answer is like I daydream about having a little pottery studio with some great big windows and a view. So it's not too late for that.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. I love that. Okay, well, this was fantastic and so helpful and super insightful. And I just really appreciate your time and, of course, your friendship. And I'll be back in New York in May. So I'm hoping I get to see you, maybe even to have some snogging on a Sunday.
Yes, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much for having me and for continuing to keep this podcast going. I've loved listening to it. And it's such a great resource for people. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim.